So it appears Axios has received some type of confirmation from AOC's staff that AOC is either running for the Senate, which would be for Chuck Schumer's seat, or she is going to be running for president in 2028. We'll get into that article in just a second, but apparently, according to her staff, they have been preparing her for this moment. So they've been prepping her along the way to run for that Senate seat or to run for president in 2028. I'm going to tell you some of the hurdles that she'll face with the presidency. I think she has a better shot with the Senate. But this is what I was talking about before, that AOC was making some of these political decisions and some of her voting decisions based on the career that she wanted to have in the Democratic Party. I believe this is part of the reason why she didn't vote for that combined, that bipartisan legislation that Marjorie Taylor Greene had to not send funding to Israel for the Iron Dome, right? So we've been kind of paying attention. I believe it's why she voted present about funding the Iron Dome years ago under the Biden administration. I believe it's why she got on that stage and said to everyone at the Democratic National Convention that Kamala Harris was working tirelessly for a ceasefire. I believe this is why she went on a video tangent to smear Jill Stein as predatory, etc. I believe this is why she has made some of the decisions that she has been making the past couple of years, because she had a goal, a political goal. And even though when she first decided to run, she said that she didn't care if she was a one-term congressperson, that obviously was not the case, or did not end up being the case. And she has decided that she does want a political career. Let's get into this video, and I'm going to tell you the hurdles that she is going to run into and things that people need to pay attention to when it comes to the Democratic Party, and the way that the DNC in particular and superdelegates will go out of their way to try to prevent this from happening. This clip here from Case Study QB, where they were discussing that Axios article. Let's get into it.
Before you go, you have a big story. I was fascinated to read about a big decision facing Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is the decision: run for president or run for Senate. How likely is it that she's going to run for president?
Well, I think there's a really significant chance, and her team is actively pursuing steps to give her the option to do that. They have basically spent more money this year than almost any other Democratic politician on building up her email lists, her social media following, so that she could end up being one of the biggest grassroots fundraisers in American politics.
Pause. Remember when AOC and Bernie started the oligarchy tour? Remember what I told you back then, that I believe that this was basically AOC testing the waters to see if she would be strong enough to go for a presidential run or a Senate race? This is what I was talking about. Like I said before, if you weren't running at that point in time, why were they raising so much money for her unless there was a pathway forward of this type of political journey? So that's what this was really all about. And not to say that she didn't mean, yeah, let's fight back against the rich people or whatever. We can have disagreement on that, because I kind of feel like if you say, fight back against the billionaires and the rich people, but you tell people to vote for Kamala Harris, who was taking all that money from billionaires, I don't know, so you can't have it both ways, right? So that's what this was really all about. This was her being prepped for, I would say she's probably going to go for a presidential run in 2028. The Senate run will probably be the safest bet for her, but it seems like she might be leaning down that 2028 presidential candidate list. That's why, like, her and Bernie going across the country, and remember what he said, they were going into places that Trump won, but then in 2016, but then Biden won in 2020. So they were going into these areas that may be a little bit purple to test out the waters. And I really felt, I said it back then, I believe that that was part of what that was about. Let's continue on here.
Basically, one person put it to me, it's like, she would raise $100 million, be one of the top candidates. And a lot of people that, when they have that option, usually run for president. Now, she could end up running for Senate instead. challenge Chuck Schumer, who's up for re-election, 74 years old, in 2028. And she's been doing town halls upstate, which is actually similar to what Chuck Schumer did when he ran for the Senate many decades ago.
And she's also been touring the country with Bernie Sanders, who likely is not going to run for president again. And perhaps she'll inherit some email lists from him too. Thanks to all.
Did everybody just catch that? He said she will inherit an email list from Bernie Sanders too. So like I tried to tell you guys back then, I tried to tell you this is really AOC's campaigning tour. That's really what this is all about. Fight back against the oligarchy. So when I run in 2028, whether it's for Senate or president, you'll remember this message. Now, it came from this article here, AOC's 2028 decision, run for president or Senate. So this is from Alex Thompson. Let's go ahead and get into this here. AOC and her team are positioning her to run for president or the U.S. Senate in 2028, according to people familiar with her operation. Why it matters. AOC's 2028 decision could shake up the presidential race or the Senate's leadership. A fellow New Yorker, Chuck Schumer, 74, is up for re-election in 2028. Now, a Senate race between Schumer and AOC, 35, would be a generational clash pitting the Democratic Party's leading traditionalists against its star insurgent progressive. State of play. This year, AOC, widely known as AOC, Ocasio-Cortez, widely known as AOC, has campaigned across the country in parts of New York State, far from her Bronx and Queens district, all while investing millions to grow her already formidable online presence. She has also brought in some former senior advisors to Senator Bernie Sanders to bolster her operation. AOC hasn't made any decision about her future, but her team is working to give her choices. So they go into talk about town halls that she has held as well. They talk about the Fighting the Oligarchy tour, which I also just told you about, right? So this is the word on the street at this point in time. And now I want to explain to you some of the hurdles that AOC is going to encounter if she runs for president in 2028, similar to some of the things that Bernie Sanders had to go up against, but maybe even a little bit differently. So according to that article, it appears it's happening. It appears she's either going for Senate or the presidency. When it comes to that Senate position, she actually will probably have a better chance of winning that, of beating Chuck Schumer. I think a lot of people in New York in particular have grown tired of Chuck Schumer. Also looking at the support that came out for Zoran Mondani and the way that he was able to run on pro-BDS rhetoric, the way that he was able to say during the debate that he would not go to Israel, he would spend time with people in New York. You know, that kind of tests the waters a little bit there, and he won that Democrat primary. So now you're looking at someone like a Chuck Schumer, who is a Zionist, who supports Israel, who had a statement where he said that he is in the Democratic Party to make sure that the left stays pro-Israel. You know, all these things have come out and they've been exposed. And so I think that she could actually beat Chuck Schumer if she has the same type of energy that Zoran Mondani had surrounding him. Now, she is going to run into some issues still, I think, with some of the pro-Palestinian protesters because of some of the things that she has done. The way that she has voted to basically say we still need the Iron Dome. You see the way that she has wavered a little bit on Israel, that's going to be problematic for some people. But ultimately, those people will probably argue, well, Chuck Schumer's even worse, so they're probably going to go ahead and support her. So I do think that she could win against Chuck Schumer. Let's get into the presidency, because this is where things become much, much, much more difficult. The problem that Bernie Sanders ran into in 2016 and 2028 is something called superdelegates. Dun, 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 dun. Now, the Republican Party doesn't have to worry about this, but they do exist in the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, in particular, 2016 with Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders won states And in one in particular, West Virginia won every county in that state, and the superdelegates gave the state to Hillary Clinton. There were multiple states that the superdelegates gave to Hillary Clinton that Bernie Sanders outright won. And that brings up this issue that she's going to have to face. The DNC. Todd calls it the DNC Services Corporation, which is pretty straightforward. During the DNC fraud lawsuit, which is after the 2016 presidential election that Bernie Sanders was a part of, the DNC said to the court, "We are a private corporation with no obligation to follow our rules." This is what AOC is going to have to deal with, right? There's no getting around this because of the way that the Democratic Party is structured. So the reality is, regardless of how much support she gets in the Democrat primary, the DNC decides who they want the nominee to be. We saw this happen, of course, recently with 2024 presidential election, where Kamala Harris was named the nominee, and there were actually candidates that were running against Joe Biden, and the DNC said, no, we're not going to have any debates. They just selected Kamala Harris. You saw it in 2016, again, when Bernie Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton and he won. Some of those states that he won were taken away during the Democratic National Convention, and the superdelegates gave those states to Hillary Clinton. Crazy thing about this is that Bernie Sanders went on after that to still hit the road and campaign and help Hillary Clinton try to win, which is actually, I feel as though Bernie Sanders should have taken a hard stand at that point and say, hell no, I'm not going to go around this country and help you win, because they took states from me and gave them to you. I won those states fair and square. Bernie Sanders should have fought back and should have stood up to the DNC, but he did not. However, some of his supporters did, including lawyers. Two lawyers in particular, Jared and Elizabeth Beck. They've been on this show before. It was Nico House who contacted them and said, we need to fight back. The DNC committed some type of fraud here against Bernie Sanders. Now, the goal at that point in time was not to say, oh, Bernie is the winner, but to help the people who donated all this money to him to get their money back. A lot of these small dollar donations that some people, for them, it was their last $10 or the last $5, but they donated it anyway because they believed that Bernie would be able to help them get health care. That's what it was for a lot of people. The problem that AOC is going to face is that the DNC picks the nominee. Now, they are not known to pick a nominee that supports these progressive policies. They are known to pick one that the donor class likes, not the person that you like, the person that the donor class likes. What's going to be beneficial to big pharma? What's going to be beneficial to Wall Street, the military industrial complex? That's the person that the DNC chooses. And because of the DNC fraud lawsuit, they were allowed to do that, and they explained why. In its defense against the fraud lawsuit from Bernie Sanders, the DNC just dug itself into an epic hole. Now, this was 2017, and I just want you guys to see what attorney Bruce Spiva at that point in time, what they were able to argue. The primary fight between Quietly and Quite Literally re-argued in a Florida courtroom, with the DNC defending itself against a class action fraud lawsuit brought by two unhappy Sanders backers, husband and wife attorneys Jared and Elizabeth Beck. Those are the attorneys that I interviewed on the show. Beck cited several now well-known examples from the DNC hacks to illustrate their point. The original complaint pointed to an internal memo dated back May 26, 2015. They treated Clinton as the presumptive nominee, outlining tactics to muddy the waters around ethics, transparency, and campaign finance attacks on HRC. So they brought a lot of evidence, right? But let me show you what Bruce Spiva was able to say. Legally, the DNC is probably on sound footing. All right, so let's get into this part here. While such arguments might be effective in a court of law, they're also a nightmare in terms of public relations for the embattled Democrats who only over a little 2 months ago faced public scorn for working to block Keith Ellison, the Sanders-backed popular choice, from becoming the DNC chair. The DNC's lawyer telling a judge that it has the right to tip the scales in favor of a certain candidate, even if that breaks its own rules, likely won't improve the DNC's image. This is exactly what was said during the fraud lawsuit. It turns out that the DNC is a corporation, that even though they have their own, I guess, bylaws or whatever, what they determine ultimately in court is that they don't even have to follow their own bylaws. It's voluntary. They go on to say this here. Let me scroll down. Keeping with this argument, Bruce Spiva, repeatedly argued throughout the hearing that the DNC has a right to be biased if it so chooses, even though he assured the court it totally wasn't. The party could have favored a candidate. I'll put it that way. Even if it were true, that's the business of the party, and it's not justiciable. Spiva went on to stress that the party's rules are simply ones they voluntarily adopted. In other words, the party rule around impartiality is one that it could just as quickly choose to jetson. And even if it didn't, and it decided to break the rule and favor one candidate, it could do so because it's the business of the party and out of the court's hands. Not that this is what happened, of course. Not the Democrats. Never. So everyone needs to understand this. He goes on to say here, we could have voluntarily decided that, look, we're going to go in the back rooms like they used to and smoke cigars and pick the candidate that way. And that would have also been their right. So ultimately, the biggest challenge that AOC is going to face is the DNC. It's the super delegates. You're not in the general election unless the super delegates say you are. That's really what it comes down to. It doesn't matter how many people voted for you in New York or Arizona or Texas. It doesn't matter. When you go to the Democratic National Convention, those super delegates are the ones that decide which states are going to go to you and which states are going to go to your opponent. What that means for AOC is that she would have to become likable enough to Democrat leadership, which explains why we saw the pictures of her kind of getting cozy with Biden and being on Team Biden and being on Team Kamala. The Democrat leadership is going to have to like you enough to the point that they can sell you the idea of you being president to the donors to go along with that. The donors, of course, have to like you. You have to be someone that they want to donate. Obviously, the DNC is not going to push someone forward that is not going to take the big money from the billionaires and the donors and Wall Street and the military industrial complex, because that way they know that if you're not taking that money, you'll be harder to control. So AOC is either going to have to, which what I think is she might be leaning to do if she goes this route, lean into the establishment and the corporate part, which is most of it, of the Democratic Party, get on the good side of Dem leadership and, of course, the super delegates and the donors in order to become the nominee. This is something that Bernie Sanders didn't do. But how is she going to do that if she's not taking corporate money? The other option is to not do any of those things and run a Bernie Sanders style campaign, grassroots funded, and get ousted in the primary by the DNC, and they will select a corporate establishment Democrat, just like before. And if that happens, I really do believe that would be the end of this progressive movement project. If AOC runs for president in 2028 and she does not get out of the primary and become the nominee, I think that's the end of the progressive movement project. because by that time, it would have been, we're almost at 10 years now. If we're starting with Bernie Sanders in 2016, we're almost at 10 years now. So by that time, we're attacking on another like 4-5 years. Either way, it's tough. Then to add on top of that, something that AOC has that Bernie Sanders, not to do with is the female card. And let's be real. Some people just don't want a female candidate. Some people don't want a female president. It's just reality. Some people don't. Not everybody, but some people don't. So you got to think about that as well. And now, based on everything that I just told you, I think this explains quite so much why AOC has moved the way that she has moved the past couple of years. Now, again, to show you what that looks like with the DNC. Here's the statement here for everyone who wants to share this with their friends. This is from Bruce Spiva, the attorney that represented the DNC. There is no such thing as a Democrat. The DNC just encourages people to vote for the Democratic Party. 2, no one has any right to an expectation of a fair election. If the DNC wishes to select a candidate in the primaries instead of the free election process, that is their right. 3, donating money to Bernie Sanders doesn't mean you thought that money was going to assist him to win the primary. You have no right to think the DNC was obligated to follow their own charter and internal policies about elections. And then 4, discussion of and any disputes with the DNC do not belong in a transparent process in a court of law. The DNC is a private association which should never be asked to engage in the discovery process or have to reveal any of its internal workings or strategies should they decide to select a candidate rather than allow a fair election of a candidate. This is what AOC is going to have to deal with, just like Bernie Sanders had to deal with it. Now that you know all that, and you know that they are preparing her to run for Senate or for President of the United States in 2028, does this all make more sense now?
And she is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bringing hostages home. And she is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bringing hostages home.
That was her preparing for her own run. We all knew at the time that that wasn't true. She knew that wasn't true. Ilhan Omar said right after she did this that this was not true. So even Ilhan Omar called her out about this. That was AOC preparing for her presidential run. This oligarchy tour that she's participating with Bernie Sanders with, yeah, part of that is, yeah, I'll fight back against Donald Trump. But also a part of that is, let me test the waters and see how I do at these rallies to see if it's time for me to run for president for 2028. And there were some of us that were calling this out at that point in time, and people didn't want to see through their rose-colored glasses. So people have ambitions. She has ambitions. And people just need to pay attention and see things for what they really are. I think it's easier for her to win the Senate seat than to win the presidency seat because of what I just told you about the DNC. But then also, New York is one place, the rest of the country is another place, right? It ultimately comes down to those swing states. Let's say she does get through the primary, and now you're looking at the swing states. She would have to win these states that Kamala lost, which would mean in order for the Democrats to win Michigan again, they have a lot of healing that needs to be done within the Muslim community. And I just don't know if that's going to happen. I really don't. I don't see the Democrats winning Michigan without winning the Muslim vote. That's why they lost in 2024. That's why they didn't win Michigan, because they lost the Muslim vote. So that's something people need to remember. Presidential elections come down to swing states. That's really what this is about. I'm sorry to say it, but that's just the reality. But her biggest hurdle is going to be getting through that primary. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.